Question 7, please.
Madam Speaker, may I have your permission to take questions 7, 8, and 9 together, please?
Yes, please.
Madam, Singapore, like the rest of the world, faces a challenging and uncertain economic environment. However, the impact on our industries has been uneven. Minister Lim Eng Kiang has just spoken on the external headwinds that are affecting industries such as wholesale trade and marine and offshore engineering, as well as the weakness in industries such as food services and real estate. Nonetheless, there are other industries such as information and communications, education, and health and social services where demand remains resilient. Engineer Dr. Lee Bee-Wah has asked about business costs. There are several components to this, and let me just speak on a few of them. The costs of utilities is expected to remain subdued given sustained low oil prices. One reference point is the regulated tariffs that households pay because they're in a non-contestable market, and that's declined by 24% from the beginning of last year to the second quarter of 2016. And there are similar trends for those in the industry, especially because they have greater flexibility in negotiating contracts. Industrial rental index has decreased by 6.8% over the past 5 quarters. For commercial rents, the office rental index in the central region fell by 12.2%, while the retail rental index, also in the central region, declined by 9.3% over the same period. And the strong pipeline supply of industrial and commercial space coming on stream in 2016 should continue to ease rental cost pressures. For labor costs, there are variations across sectors. In the manufacturing sector, the unit labor costs fell by 0.7%. This is in Q2 on a year-on-year basis, on the back of productivity improvements. In contrast, the unit labor costs in the services sector rose by 4.5%. These trends and the differential impact on our industries underscore the need to redouble our efforts to improve productivity and to adopt industry-specific strategies to sustain competitiveness. Against this challenging economic backdrop, the government seeks to help companies manage immediate pressures, but also, importantly, to adapt to stay competitive in the medium to long term. So Spring launched the working capital loan this year to help address small and medium enterprises' near-term cash flow concerns and growth financing needs. This working capital loan is expected to catalyze more than $2 billion of loans over the next 3 years and complements existing loan schemes. This year, there has been a strong take-up of Spring's various loan schemes, with over $1.2 billion worth of loans given to SMEs so far. Notwithstanding these cyclical headwinds, there remain good opportunities, market opportunities for our companies. If I can illustrate, the annual growth for the ASEAN region is expected to average 5.2% from 2016 to 2020. And in fact, for Asia, it's meant to be even higher. And this is significantly higher compared to the projected global growth for the same period. And to seize these opportunities, our industries, enterprises, and workers must transform. Structurally, Singapore is entering a new mode of growth. Rather than increasing manpower, we must anchor Singapore's competitiveness and growth in increased productivity and greater innovation. So in April this year, the government announced a grant budget of over $2.3 billion under the Enterprise Development Fund for the development of local companies. This will support the efforts that are undertaken at the enterprise level to upgrade capabilities, automate processes, and internationalize. In addition, as part of the $4.5 billion industry transformation program announced in Budget 2016, the government will develop customized roadmaps for key industries. This is really what the industry transformation maps are about. Each roadmap will comprise a growth and competitiveness plan supported by strategies to upgrade productivity, develop skills, promote technology adoption and innovation, and help our companies expand overseas. Mr. Saktiandi Supaat asked about falling private investments. Attracting investments remains a key part of our strategy to grow the Singapore economy. The investment commitments that EDB has secured for fixed asset investments have moderated from $12.1 billion in 2013 to $11.5 billion in 2015. This is partly due to the uncertain global economic conditions, but it's also a reflection of our targeted approach towards attracting projects that are more consistent with our stage of economic development, our manpower policies, and international commitments on carbon emissions. Companies generally understand and accept these constraints, which are by no means unique to Singapore, and have been supportive of our push towards productivity-driven growth. Reinvestments from the existing base of companies have focused on increasing productivity through the adoption of automation technologies and upskilling of the workforce. In addition, EDB continues to harness investor interests in the growth markets of Asia and ASEAN to establish homes, that is, headquarters that comprise top decision makers and differentiating competencies. These initiatives don't always entail large fixed asset investments, but they create good jobs for Singaporeans. Associate Professor Randolph Tan asked if there have been difficulties filling jobs created via EDB's investment commitments. At the project level, EDB works closely with the companies to meet their projected job commitments. And this includes partnering our academic institutions and industry to ensure that Singaporeans are equipped with the appropriate skill sets to take up the diverse range of jobs that are on offer. Specific interventions include curriculum development for pre-employment training, continuing education and training with local institutes of higher learning, as well as partnerships with companies to provide apprenticeships and other applied learning opportunities for our students. These manpower efforts are aligned with our National Skills Future movement, which aims to prepare Singaporeans for jobs of the future with a judicious complement of foreign manpower to address any skills gaps in the short to medium term. Madam, the Singapore economy will continue to create and generate good job opportunities for Singaporeans who are willing to upgrade their skills and work in growth sectors. For 2016, EDB expects investment commitments to create 20 to 22,000 jobs. This represents an increase in job commitments compared to 16,800 in 2015 and 18,600 in 2014. And at the same time, our industry transformation efforts, which I have described, will also support sustainable job creation in the medium term in both new and existing industries. Many of these jobs and others in sectors like education and healthcare are suitable not just for new entrants to the job market, but also for mature workers seeking a new career. The Minister for Manpower will be elaborating on our efforts and measures to help workers adapt and secure these job opportunities. Madam, the successful economic transformation will require the collective effort of our workers, unions, companies, industry associations, and the government. And it is critical that our companies stand ready to embrace new technologies and business models, and that our workers stay open to learning new skills and capabilities in order to take on new or redesigned jobs. On its part, the government is firmly committed to supporting our workers and companies through this transformation.
Mr. Saktiandi Supaat.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for the answer and the data that he shared just now about the drop by about $10 billion in terms of EDB's commitments for over the past 2 years. And he explained that the targeted approach actually led to that decline. In light of the economic transformation, the cyclical headwinds, the data shows also in terms of declining foreign manufacturing investments over the past 2.5 years or so, a bit concerned on that part, and I was wondering what the government's view is that in terms of declining foreign manufacturing investments, particularly because the job creation in the manufacturing side probably would create a bit more volume than that in the services side. And what would be the government's sort of strategy in terms of the declining foreign manufacturing investments in light of the decline in the EDB foreign investment commitments over the next 5 to 10 years? Thank you.
Madam, I thank the member for his question. First, a point of clarification. It's not a decline of 10 billion. It's about, I said 12.1 billion in 2013 and 11.5 billion in 2015. So it's a different order of magnitude. Secondly, when you're talking about manufacturing investments in Singapore, let me talk in general terms and also specific. First, manufacturing is changing. So it's no longer just about investing in fixed assets, plants, equipment, and doing manufacturing in the conventional sense that we understand. In fact, manufacturing has got a very significant complementary aspect. Some call it the servitization of manufacturing. And what it basically means is traditional manufacturers are also embarking on very different service-oriented models. One example is like Rolls-Royce. We understand Rolls-Royce to be a company that sells engines for aircrafts. But Rolls-Royce is increasingly moving towards a model where they sell power by the hour. In other words, I don't sell you the engine, but I sell you the power that drives the aircraft by the hour. And that means the business model changes. It may not always be reflected as an investment in manufacturing in our context, but in terms of its impact on the economy and in terms of what we are doing in terms of job creation, it remains absolutely valid. So in a very general sense, manufacturing is changing. Having said that, even at the sort of more traditional understanding of manufacturing, we continue to attract good investments. In recent times, members would have read about the commitment by Micron, which is a substantial investment in semiconductor manufacturing in the wafer fabrication sector, which is an important part of our electronics cluster in Singapore. Also about AbbVie in the biopharmaceutical manufacturing. So we continue to attract good quality manufacturing investments. But the key is really to make sure that the investments that we attract are consistent with, first, as I said earlier, our stage of development, because it's no point shoehorning a manufacturer into our environment if it is not something that's sustainable in the medium to long term. Far better for us to target the sectors or the parts of the value chain that can continue to operate in Singapore in a sustainable way, and that will then drive, I think, the economic growth and job creation.
Engineer Lee Biwa.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask our Minister two supplementary questions. I think just a few days ago, there was a pharmaceutical research company pulled out of Singapore. I'd like to ask Minister whether is there a concern and what is the real reason? Will there be more companies pulled out of Singapore? And the second question is that at the ground, there are quite a lot of retrenchment as well as pay cut. Is Minister concerned with this, and is there any measures to be taken soon? Thank you.
Madam, I thank the member for her questions. I think you're referring to the announcement about Novartis moving out their tropical disease research facility. So I don't want to go into the details of a specific company or what drives their decision, but let me make a more general point. First of all, one should not read too much into individual cases because individual companies make decisions for a variety of reasons. It could be because of internal restructuring. Sometimes it could be something as prosaic as the person in charge of that particular line of business has decided he wants to run things in a different way. And all these things have got knock-on effects in the way the business is restructured. So I would not want to extrapolate from that and draw broader conclusions about the viability, for example, in this case, of our biopharmaceutical space. If you look more broadly at the space, we continue to, so as I said, just a couple of weeks back, I opened a facility by AbbVie, biopharmaceutical, producing state-of-the-art biological treatments for cancers and various other disease conditions. So I think it continues to be, in the context of Singapore, we continue to attract good investments in this space. We shouldn't be complacent, but it's not something that should cause great alarm because it is in the context of one particular company making a decision on one particular aspect of its activity in Singapore. The other point was about retrenchments and pay cuts and so on. I think Minister for Manpower will be addressing several of these points later, but let me just make a more general point. If you look at the job creation data that I shared with you, we continue to create jobs, and there are adequate jobs in many ways to meet the needs and aspirations of Singaporeans. The real challenge for us is in ensuring that Singaporeans have the right skill sets in order to be able to take those jobs and run with it and develop new careers with it, in the case of those who are switching careers. So that's really the summary of the situation, and Minister for Manpower will be able to give a far more detailed explanation.
Associate Professor Randolph Tan.
Thank you, Madam. Thank the Minister for his apparently good news, which is that job creation is actually increasing. But I think that is a challenge because I think we all know about the slack in the labour market. I think my question, if I may, goes back to the last point that Minister made, which is that with increasing job creation and the slack in the labour market, what are the challenges? Have we seen what's happened in the last 5 years, for instance, where we have either been able to or not able to find a match between supply and demand of certain types of skilled manpower?
If I may clarify, your question is whether we've been able to find appropriate manpower to fill the jobs. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So first, I want to just restate the point I made earlier, Madam Speaker, which is that EDB's efforts continue to generate jobs. There are some sectors, other sectors where also there are jobs being created, such as, for example, in education and in healthcare. There are also sectors which are taking a bit of a hit because of external headwinds, and therefore there's job decline there, if you like. So you've got to look at the economy as a whole. It's uneven. There are pockets where the opportunities exist for companies, for individuals. There are pockets where the environment and the circumstances are more challenging. The point about whether we're able to find appropriate people, Singaporeans, to take up the jobs, this continues to be the key challenge because we are seeing major changes in the way various industries are running because there's a lot more emphasis. For example, if I can take one or two cases in point, in the whole digital economy space, the importance of cybersecurity and the importance of having people who understand digital space and are able to work with data and do analytics and inform a company's business and marketing strategies. These are very essential skill sets in the new economy. There's a global shortage of people in this sort of space. So we are not unique in this. So we are creating opportunities, and there are other sectors I can talk about. So there's always this issue of a skills mismatch, which is why we need to work on this on a few levels. The first is securing the investments and the opportunities so that we actually have a pipeline that Singaporeans can benefit from. Second is to work upstream with our universities and institutions of higher learning to make sure that the skill sets that are needed are being provided, not just through 3-year degree programs or diploma programs, but even if necessary, doing some targeted modular programs, which is what we do collectively between MTI and MOM and our agencies like EDB working with WDA and with MOE and the institutions. So that's on the one side. This is more pre-employment for new entrants. But I think on the other side is really for the mature workers who are looking to switch careers. Harder to do, but it's something that's very important. And that's why I made the point that many of the jobs can actually be taken up by mature workers. But they need to make the move, adapt, take up the relevant skills training and adjustment in order to be able to participate in the new business. And we've seen examples of people doing that. In the biopharmaceutical company that I met, I saw an individual who was in his late 40s, worked in China in the electronic sector, came back because the company terminated his employment. He came back, he decided he wanted to make a switch. He got into the biopharmaceutical space. He got the training through WDA, and I think it's a PCP program, Professional Conversion Program. And he's now, I think he heads the unit there in certain aspects of production. So it's a good example, I mean, individual stories, but demonstrating that the larger strategy can work, but we need the individuals to step up and benefit fully from our programs.
Mr. Liang Eng Hua.
Thank you, Madam. I'm not sure whether the Minister have addressed the question by Mr. Satyandi on the number of firms failing closures. But I would like to ask again whether the Minister see increasing numbers of companies running into serious problem and not surviving. And related to that, whether as these companies fail, are we at risk of permanently losing these capabilities, the engineering capabilities, economic capabilities, for example, for the oil and gas sector, the contracting capabilities, and whether the government will come up with sector-specific measures to help this industry, these sectors. For example, the ITM, the Industry Transformation Map, whether you may want to early activate this to help these companies.
I thank the member for the question. Let me first clarify. I think the member, and I think the earlier question was working off data provided by ACRA. And I think the data you looked at was September. I understand, because I did a check, ACRA has actually updated the data. And in fact, in the first quarter and second quarter of this year, there was actually net enterprise formation positive. And I think it was actually not an insignificant number. I think it was 2,000 in first quarter and 9,000 in the second quarter. And I think this has got something also to do, and there's some explanation there about some technical treatment. So I would urge members to check it out and also to maybe file a question to get further clarification. But the first point I'm making is, actually in the first 2 quarters of this year, rather than negative, it's actually been positive enterprise formation, at least based on the data that you get from ACRA. But I think the more important point that you're raising is really whether we have a concern in terms of what's happening on the ground in terms of companies. Because enterprise formation, some companies form SPVs, there's restructuring, and these things happen all the time. They don't necessarily reflect or affect what's happening on the ground in terms of actual business and jobs. So I would say that if I go back to the point I made earlier, there is a diversity of, if you look at the landscape, it's variegated. And some sectors are doing well or reasonably well. Others are having a hard time. And even within the sectors that are challenged, there are companies that are thriving because they have been able to adapt or they've been able to find a niche and they're doing well. So the fact of the matter is it is an uneven terrain. So it's not so much about having a broad brush, general program or strategy, because that's just going to be wasteful. And some would argue that the natural business cycle should allow to take its course so that there's some appropriate consolidation and rechanneling of resources at the economy level. But we are mindful that there are certain sectors or industries where we do need to be very careful that we don't in the process lose core capabilities that have been built up over a long period of time. And therefore, I think in those sorts of very specific areas, we are tracking it and we are working on ideas as to how we can do this in a way that doesn't become so interventionist that it distorts the market, but it minimizes the loss of capabilities, which we need to preserve in order to sustain the competitiveness of our companies in those sectors, especially when the situation improves.
Mr. Zaki Mohammed.
The Minister spoke about transformations of the various industries. I think one feedback I often get from the industries are that how do they align with some of these strategies or sub-strategies? Because a lot of times the Ministry talks about strategies in very broad terms, but from a sector-specific agenda, would the Ministry be sharing specific sector strategies, whether certain sectors will be defocused and others, being ramped up? And I think what the industry is looking for is guidance, so that also helps with in terms of manpower deployment and transformation as well. Where do they align to? So would the Ministry be sharing its sub-strategies or in a more detailed manner? Thank you, Minister.
The member raises an important point. First, the industry transformation maps are being developed for 23 sectors, which we've talked about. It's a process. We have already announced a couple of them. One is in food services, and another is for retail. And there will be progressively more of these programs that are announced and shared. These programs go into a great deal of detail. They go into a great deal of detail in terms of the productivity aspects, the innovation aspects, the internationalization aspects, and the manpower aspects. So many of the programs that we have are being at the back end integrated and being channeled along these lines. So for the businesses, I think in order to understand and navigate the space, the first thing I would say is we will definitely be communicating this, not just through major announcements, but it will be percolated down through the industry associations and various other channels. Second, I think even if the larger transformation plan may not be entirely relevant for a particular business, what they need to do is really get in touch with, if I'm talking about an SME in particular, get in touch with either one of our SME centers, which are quite a number now on the ground through our various chambers and trade associations, or through their trade associations and industry association members, and they will, or directly with Spring, for example. And I think then the dialogue can start, what is appropriate in terms of the company's own plans and strategies, and how some of the programs that we have can assist them.